On today's podcast, we're talking about redefining the word toughness and how that serves us as leaders, as teams, and organizations when grit is absolutely required for the world that we live in today. Welcome back to the Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast. Wherever you are, however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad you are here. This continues to grow and spread in exciting ways, and so if you're somebody that's been with us from the very beginning, thank you. So glad you're back, that this continues to contribute to your life and your work. And for anybody new, welcome to the podcast. We're in season 6, so I think we're like 140 episodes or something like that into this. And so if you haven't checked out past episodes, I invite you to dive into it. There's so much great content. Interviews I've been lucky to have with people around, so check those out. My commitment to everybody is that this is a space for you in your life and your work to step back, to have a space that hopefully breathes in good oxygen to you and helps you think about, the temperature that you're trying to set in your own life and work. I'm as convinced as ever in this that we need authentic leadership, which means caring, connected, part of a mission greater than ourselves kind of leadership in the world today more than ever. And we also need to be a part of creating compelling cultures, to helping bring out the best in people so they can use their gifts and talents to serve and to connect and to stimulate progress and whatever that might be for you or your team, your organization. So glad you're here and so glad you're a part of these conversations. Before we dive into today's episode, if you'll do one quick thing for me, if you'll rate the podcast, hopefully 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you're listening to, just that helps people find it and is so helpful. So rate the podcast. If you'll leave a nice review with your own authentic words about it, why it is meaningful or important for others, that helps the algorithms work and amplify the messages. And then, of course, sharing it with the people around you. So share it on social media. If there's an episode that resonates with you, or share it with your colleagues, on your team or throughout your organization. If there's conversations that you think would be helpful to your team or to the people around you, then I invite you to share it, because that's also the way that this thing spreads. So thank you, and so glad that you're a part of this. On today's podcast, we're talking about redefining the word toughness and how that serves us as leaders, as teams, and organizations when grit is absolutely required for the world that we live in today. So keep listening. We'll take a quick break. Let's pause for a second, and we'll be right back with today's episode. Hey, everyone. I wanted to take a quick minute to remind you about one of my favorite days of the year that is coming up, Thermostat Cultures Live on Friday, November 4th, 2022. This is a powerful day of development that I host, and an opportunity for us all to step back, take a deep breath, and calibrate our thermostats for the road ahead in our leadership roles and the cultures we are creating. This year, this is a hybrid event, and there are limited seats available for the in-person, very cool VIP experience in Columbus, Ohio. And there are also online virtual seats available for those who want to engage from a remote location. As always, I'll be joined by amazing other thought leaders from around the globe, and it'll be a day you won't want to miss. Visit thermostatcultureslive.com to learn more and to reserve your seat or seats for your team. The first thing I'm just going to quickly say as we start today's episode, again, is a thank you to everybody out there. Breathing Oxygen, the book is now, officially launched, but is still launching. And so I just want to say thank you to everybody who continues to help with that. The messages I receive from people that have read the book and it's really resonating with them. That is so important and helpful to me. When you write a book, you hope people actually read it, but then also hope that it adds value and contributes to them. And then also the fact that people are sharing it is with the people around them is so great. So thank you to everybody. I'll just say that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. On the last episode that we had on this podcast, we talked about the 4 stages of the creative process. And we talked about how we think about and how we see that creativity is a process, much like everything else, and how we see, how we think about it, and then how we honor those stages of the creative process actually impacts our actions, our behavior, our interactions, and absolutely our performance. And so if you didn't hear it, I invite you to go back and listen to the last episode, and the one before that also builds upon it, mental agility, and talking about kind of how mental agility, the way we see things through a lens of possibility and opportunity, helps us then adapt and find opportunities that might be in front of us. So if you didn't hear those, I encourage you to go back and listen to those. Today we're going to talk about, though, a topic as a part of leading in the world today that is critical. And we're gonna talk about this concept of grit, but we're also going to talk about, I'm going to talk about grit as a leader in the context of toughness and the word toughness, and that we need to be mentally tough as leaders and as humans. But I want to start by redefining toughness, because I don't want us to enter this conversation with some old story or narrative or baggage we have in the past of what we think toughness really is or looks like. I want to make sure that we're thinking about mental toughness and grit through the lens that I'm really talking about. So let's start with redefining toughness. Along the way, we need to make sense. We're speaking the same language and defining terms in similar ways, as that's my style. I've talked about the fact that the word leadership, it needs to be redefined to make sure that it's not about, leadership isn't about the person at the top of the pyramid of the hierarchy that kind of barks out orders and just tells everybody what to do, but really one who serves a mission greater than themselves and serves people. And so I've talked about, turning that pyramid upside down in our own minds and our own hearts. And so we need to redefine and make sure that when we say the term leadership, that's what we're talking about. I've also talked about the importance of understanding the term culture, another word that we talk about a lot, especially on this podcast and in the work I do with teams and organizations, is we need to make sure that we understand the term, that culture, we need to define it as a dynamic ecosystem of the way that we think, act, and interact. And it's, and so it's dynamic. It's always changing, and we all help shape it by the way we show up and think, act, and interact in the midst of that cultural ecosystem. So if we're talking about things like leadership and culture, it's helpful to make sure that we're defining them so that we're talking about the same kind of things. And when you hear those words, that's what you think about. And so in my opinion, when we start talking about this element of grit or toughness around the concept of leadership, it's about time that we redefine the word toughness. Because remember in elementary school when the quote-unquote tough kid was known as just the biggest, strongest, kind of baddest person on the playground? And so we often threw around the term tough, that they were tough. They were the tough kid. But that's really not toughness, even though that's the way we talked about it as kids. In fact, as we all learned at many different times after that as kids, that people often thought to be quote-unquote tough due to their size or their strength or their quote-unquote badness were actually oftentimes the most mentally soft. Toughness isn't about size and physical strength, although I know many tough people who are also big and strong. There are many big football players that are big and strong and absolutely tough, but that isn't a prerequisite for being tough. Some of the toughest people I know, mentally toughest people I know, are not the biggest physical specimens. Toughness, in its most common definition, is the ability to, quote, withstand great force without tearing or breaking. Withstand great force without tearing or breaking. Toughness within people begins in the mind. Toughness in the toughest people I know begins in their mind and their heart and grows outward. They have the ability to withstand great external forces without tearing and breaking and finding a way to keep taking a step forward. And so mental toughness is the ability to endure, to suffer even in some ways, to fear, to care, to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable is actually mentally tough. And to respond then in the midst of that suffering or that fear or that vulnerability, to also take a step forward to care for yourself and also care for other people. And so being tough is the ability to move into the next moment in your future with resolve to make it better. Even those suffering from mental illness are some of the toughest people out there because they are withstanding great forces of anxiety and chemistry in their brains and fears, and yet still are finding a way to believe in a future that they are still creating and choosing to take a next step to move themselves or the people around them forward. And so pushing a smaller kid around on the playground isn't tough. It's easy. Stepping in front of the bigger kid to help the smaller kid requires toughness. Every day in our personal lives and places of employment, we need tough leaders who have the resolve to walk with people, not tough by pushing people around and barking out orders, but tough by the ability to endure, to suffer even a little bit, to fear, to recognize we're all human and we might have fears, but still choosing to care, an ability to be vulnerable, and then respond by taking a step forward with what is within our control and how can we make a decision, stimulate progress, and how can we care for the people around us. It requires toughness to strive to be excellent at what you do. It requires toughness to be able to put yourself out there by making a presentation or challenging the status quo of your team or your organization. It requires toughness to admit you are hurting and to reach out to a teammate when they say they're struggling or when you just know they're struggling. Because the easier path is to ignore it or not say anything. It requires toughness to admit when you are wrong, when you messed up. It requires toughness to choose to walk towards someone you disagree with rather than away from them. The easier path is just to walk away from anybody that might think or believe something different than us. It requires mental toughness and grit to actually walk towards somebody to better understand them, even when they might disagree or we might disagree with them. We have all had and will continue to have moments in our lives, of course, of toughness and weakness. None of us are perfect, and all of us have moments where maybe we are mentally tougher than other times, and times when we recognize our own weakness. Leaders and teams who learn to breathe in oxygen into themselves and the people around them, the other people around them, and practice a kind of mental toughness that challenges everyone around them to walk beside and with each other. They exhibit grit. They show people that to lead in the world today requires a little grit, this kind of mental toughness and resolve for other people. It is far easier to just cut and run, to ditch out, to avoid the challenge. We know that. It's way easier to do that. But mental toughness calls us to respond and move forward toward a better future than what we might be experiencing in the present moment. I love this. So Jay Billis, who's a ESPN analyst for college basketball, Jay Billis, and he's a former Duke basketball player. He actually wrote a book called Toughness, and I love this idea of making sure that we're defining toughness in this kind of way. And I read it, but I think about it in terms of our leadership and the way we show up with the people around us, not just our own individual performance. But he quotes Kansas basketball coaching legend Bill Self, who just won the national championship this last year. He quotes him as saying, as Bill Self said, "The difference between tough and soft is simple. Soft is when you choose the easier path when the right path is the harder one. The difference between tough and soft is simple. Soft is when you choose the easier path when the right path is the harder one." So having kind of grit and resolve and mental toughness is necessary in our life and our work. I know for the most significant times in my life, personally, my parents being ill and both passing away, that the required grit and resolve and toughness, mental toughness in the midst of challenges that weren't going away, to sit in that suffering, to endure the kind of pain and sadness and fear that we might have, but also being vulnerable with each other and choosing then to care and to show up anyway and to control everything that we could control in the midst of those moments. We also know that's been required of so many leaders, teams, and organizations over the last 2 years with a global pandemic and issues of social justice and racism, political and economic uncertainty, so much divisive fighting in the world, that grit and resolve and mental toughness as leaders is necessary in our life and our work. And breathing oxygen into ourselves helps us take that next step to make sense of what we might be experiencing and then help breathe oxygen into the people around us so they can breathe a little easier and take that next step. Leaders who understand this and teams and organizations that are committed to helping people breathe better, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because we also know it expands our performance. It helps us stimulate progress. It helps us be better tomorrow than we are today. That means we have to practice kind of breathing oxygen into other people and into ourselves so that we can improve the sight lines of what we're trying to do next and how we all play a part in leading the future that we want to create together. Healthy and authentic and compelling cultures aren't something that just magically happen. We have to be able to lead them, and we have to be willing to go on the process together to breathe oxygen into ourselves, to have the kind of mental resolve and toughness to help us take that next step to stimulate progress. And so, as always, this week, I want to leave you with some questions to ponder as you're thinking about your own life and your work, and you're redefining this kind of mental toughness and grit and resolve in your own mind. In what ways does your life and work need a bit of toughness and grit right now? Not toughness in the sense of pushing people around, but toughness in terms of enduring, withstanding, courageously taking a next step, being vulnerable and caring for the people around you. In what ways does your life and work need that kind of mental toughness and grit right now? What examples in your life and work need some deep breaths? Sometimes we just need to take those deep breaths and then identify the next step that we're going to take. So what examples in your life and work need some deep breaths and next steps? And then what would be practices that will help you breathe differently, to practice this kind of thinking and mindset and breathe into yourself wherever you might be? What are the practices that are going to help you breathe in the midst of all that you might be experiencing? So I hope these questions serve you and help you think about the kind of resolve and grit and mental toughness that you have the ability to breathe in yourself and bring to the people around you. And so I hope that serves you this week as you think about all this. The last thing I'll leave you with today before we take off is I continue to get messages from people saying, hey, how can I help with the book launch? Is it over or can I still help? Of course you can. It's still launching, I say. And so there's 3 quick ways. 1, order the book if you haven't already and read it. I want my book to actually be read. So all the people out there that continue to send me messages about what resonated with them, that gives me oxygen. But I want people to actually read it. And then, so get it and read it. Then the second thing is, if and only if it resonates with you and you think it's worthy of being sharing it in the world, share it with other people. Give gifts to people. Share it in your team, in your organization. Help bring share this kind of oxygen with the people around you. And then the third way is to leave reviews on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever it is that you get the book, to leave a 5-star, hopefully, review with your words about why these messages are important in the world that we're in right now. If you have other ideas of how you can help amplify the messages of breathing oxygen, or you want to share it further, send us a message, info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com, and we'll talk about creative ways to do that. So let's all breathe in appreciation and gratitude for all that is within our control. Let's think about the temperature that we're trying to set as humans, let alone leaders and teams. And then let's remind ourselves that our own internal temperature sets a temperature for people externally, and that we're going to need to be able to breathe good oxygen into ourselves so that we're able to breathe oxygen into the people around us. So I hope you'll keep tuning in. I hope this has been helpful to you today. There's more great episodes coming down the road. And remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat and then staying committed to breathing in good oxygen themselves and helping the people around them also breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.